David Reynolds had been dreaming about this vacation for 3 years. Every late night at the office, every missed soccer game, every weekend spent working instead of being with his family, it all led to this moment. As he stood on the balcony of their ocean view suite, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, he finally felt like all those sacrifices had been worth it. His wife, Patricia, came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I still can't believe we're actually here," she whispered. "This place is like something out of a magazine." David smiled. The Azure Bay Resort was everything the website had promised and more. Crystal chandeliers in the lobby, marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, and staff members who treated every guest like royalty. The price tag had made him wince when he first saw it, $8,000 for 5 nights. But after 15 years of building his career as an accountant, he'd finally made partner at his firm. This was their celebration. Their daughter, Keisha, burst onto the balcony, her braids bouncing with excitement. Dad? The pool has a water slide that goes through a fake volcano. Can we go, please?" Behind her, their son, little Devin, peered out shyly. At just 9 years old, he was still getting used to fancy places like this. Back home in Cleveland, their neighborhood was nice enough, but nothing like this coastal paradise where every other car in the parking lot seemed to be a Mercedes or a Tesla. "After breakfast, sweetheart," Patricia promised. "Let's enjoy that buffet we paid a small fortune for." The first 2 days passed like a dream. They ate lobster for the first time as a family. Devin learned to body surf in the gentle waves. Keisha made friends with kids from New York and California, all of them splashing in the resort's massive pool complex. David and Patricia even managed to sneak away for a couple's massage while the kids were at the resort's activity club. On the 3rd day, everything changed. It started small, the way these things always do. David was sitting by the pool, reading a thriller novel he'd been meaning to finish for months. Patricia had gone back to the room to grab sunscreen. The kids were at the shallow end, playing with a beach ball they'd bought at the gift shop. David noticed the couple staring first. They were older, maybe in their 60s, both wearing expensive-looking resort wear and designer sunglasses. The woman leaned over to her husband and whispered something. The husband glanced at David, then at the kids, then back to his wife. They both nodded like they'd just solved a mystery. David tried to ignore it. He'd dealt with stares before. Being a black family in spaces like this, it wasn't new. But it never stopped being uncomfortable. 10 minutes later, the couple got up from their lounge chairs and walked toward the main building. David didn't think much of it. Maybe they were getting lunch. Maybe they were calling it a day. He went back to his book. 20 minutes after that, 2 security guards appeared. They weren't subtle about it. They walked straight toward David with that purposeful stride that said this wasn't a friendly check-in. David's stomach tightened. He marked his page and set the book down. "Excuse me, sir," the taller guard said. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a crew cut and a radio clip to his belt. "Can we see your room key?" David blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your room key," the guard repeated, his partner standing slightly behind him with crossed arms. "We need to verify you're a guest here." Around them, other guests were starting to notice. A woman at the next pool chair over paused her conversation. A family getting ice cream from the nearby cart turned to watch. David felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice calm. "Is there a problem?" "Just need to see your key, sir." Standard procedure. It wasn't standard procedure. David had been at this resort for 3 days and hadn't seen the guards ask anyone else for proof they belonged here. But he reached for his pool bag anyway and pulled out his wallet. Inside was the digital room key card. "Room 847, David said, handing it over. "The presidential suite." The guard looked at the card, then at David, then at his partner. Something in his expression said he didn't believe it. "And you're saying this is your room?" "I'm not saying it. I'm telling you it is. Sir, we've had reports of unauthorized individuals using the resort facilities." David's jaw tightened. "Reports from who?" The guard didn't answer. By now, Devin and Keisha had noticed something was wrong. They climbed out of the pool dripping wet, their happy afternoon suddenly clouded with confusion. "Dad?" Keisha called. "What's happening?" "Nothing, baby," David called back, trying to keep his voice light. Just a misunderstanding, but it wasn't nothing and it wasn't a misunderstanding. This was profiling, plain and simple, and David knew it was about to get worse. "We're going to need you to come with us to the front desk. the taller guard said. To verify your information. I just showed you my room key. Anyone could have that. We need to check the system. Patricia arrived then, the sunscreen bottle in her hand. She took one look at the scene. The guards, David's tense posture, the growing audience of curious guests, and her expression went from confused to furious in seconds. What is going on? She demanded. Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Your job is to harass paying guests? Patricia stepped between David and the guards. As a lawyer, she knew exactly how these situations could escalate. My husband showed you our room key. We've been here for 3 days. What more do you want? We need to verify. Verify what? That black people can afford to stay at nice resorts? The words hung in the air. Other guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others pulled out their phones, not even trying to hide the fact they were recording. The guard's radio crackled. He stepped away to answer it, speaking in low tones. When he came back, his expression had hardened. The manager would like to speak with you at the front desk. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. David's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct told him to fight back, to argue, to demand justice right here and now. But he had his kids watching. He had other guests recording. And he'd seen too many videos of situations like this going horribly wrong. Fine, he said quietly. Let's go to the front desk. As they walked through the resort, David, Patricia, and their confused, frightened children, escorted by security guards like criminals, David noticed the stares multiplying. Whispers followed them like a wave. Some guests looked sympathetic. Others looked satisfied, like their suspicions about the black family had been confirmed. The walk to the lobby felt like a mile. Keisha held Patricia's hand tight. Devin pressed close to David's side. And with every step, David felt the anger building inside him like pressure in a sealed container. When they reached the massive lobby with its gleaming floors and crystal chandeliers, David saw the manager waiting. Behind him, smirking near the concierge desk, were the older couple who'd been staring earlier. They looked pleased with themselves. But what made David's blood run cold was the sight beyond the glass doors at the resort's entrance. Red and blue lights flashed against the afternoon sun. The security guards hadn't just called the manager. They'd called the police. David looked down at Devin, who was trying so hard to be brave even though his bottom lip was trembling. He looked at Keisha, her teenage confidence shattered by this public humiliation. He looked at Patricia, who was already mentally preparing for a legal battle. And in that moment, David made a decision. He would stay calm. He would protect his family. And when the time was right, he would make sure everyone involved understood exactly who they were dealing with. Because David Reynolds wasn't just an accountant who'd worked hard for this vacation. He had another identity, one that nobody in this resort knew about yet. And when the truth finally came out, everything was about to change in ways none of these people could possibly imagine. The police officers pushed through the entrance doors, their badges glinting in the chandelier light, and David took a deep breath. His perfect family vacation had just turned into something else, entirely. Something that would make national news before the week was over. 3 police officers walked into the Azure Bay Resort lobby like they owned the place. The first one through the door was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair at his temples and the kind of walk that said he'd been doing this job for a long time. His name tag read Officer Bradley. Behind him came 2 younger officers, a woman and a man, both looking serious and alert. David felt Devin's small hand grip his shirt tighter. He put his arm around his son's shoulders, trying to provide some comfort even though his own heart was racing. Officer Bradley's eyes swept the lobby, taking in the scene, the nervous manager, the security guards, the family standing in the middle of it all, and the growing crowd of guests who'd gathered to watch the drama unfold. His gaze settled on David. "We got a call about a trespassing situation," Bradley announced, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Who's in charge here?" The resort manager, a thin man named Mr. Hendricks, stepped forward quickly. "Officer, thank you for coming. We have a situation that needs to be resolved. This family claims to be guests, but there's been some confusion about their status." "Confusion?" Patricia's voice was sharp. "There's no confusion. We've been paying guests for 3 days. This is racial profiling, pure and simple." Officer Bradley held up his hand. "Ma'am, let's not jump to conclusions. We're just here to sort things out." He turned to David. "Sir, can I see some identification?" David reached for his wallet slowly, very aware that sudden movements around police officers could be misinterpreted. He'd had the talk with Devon just last year. How to behave if police ever stopped him, how to keep his hands visible, how to stay calm even when his heart was pounding. He'd never imagined he'd need to practice those same rules in front of his son at a luxury resort. He handed over his driver's license, his credit cards, and pulled up the reservation confirmation on his phone. "We're in the presidential suite. Room 847, we checked in 3 days ago. You can verify everything." Bradley barely glanced at the documents. "These could be fake. We need to do a thorough verification." "Fake?" David's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "How exactly would I fake a reservation at this resort?" The female officer, whose name tag said Officer Martinez, stepped closer. "Sir, getting defensive isn't going to help your situation. We're just trying to establish the facts. The facts are that my family and I are legal guests being treated like criminals because someone decided we don't look like we belong here." David shot back. By now, at least 30 people had gathered in the lobby. Some stood by the elevators pretending to wait while they watched. Others sat in the plush chairs near the fireplace, no longer even hiding their interest. Several had their phones out, recording every moment. Keisha stood beside her mother, tears streaming down her face. She'd always been the confident one, the girl who made friends easily, who stood up for herself at school. But right now she looked small and scared, and David felt something crack inside his chest. "Please," he said, forcing his voice to stay level. "You're frightening my children. We've done nothing wrong. Can we please just resolve this quietly?" Mr. Hendricks shuffled some papers at the front desk, his movements frustratingly slow. "The computer system is running a bit slow today," he mumbled, not meeting anyone's eyes. "But yes, I do see a reservation under Reynolds." "You do see it?" Patricia stepped forward, her lawyer instincts fully engaged now. "We've been here 3 days. You've processed our credit card multiple times. You've delivered room service to our suite. What exactly is unclear about our status?" Officer Bradley moved his hand to rest on his belt near his weapon. It was a subtle gesture, but everyone noticed it. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and lower your voice. You're becoming aggressive." "Aggressive?" Patricia's eyes widened. "I'm standing here defending my family from being falsely accused. That's not aggressive, that's called being a parent." The third officer, the younger male one, spoke up for the first time. "Look, this doesn't have to be difficult. Just cooperate with us, let us verify everything, and if it all checks out, you can go back to your vacation." "And if we refuse to be treated like criminals?" David asked quietly. Officer Bradley's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to consider that obstruction, and things will get a lot more complicated." "Is that what you want? To be arrested in front of your kids?" The threat hung in the air like smoke. Devon made a small sound, almost like a whimper, and pressed closer to David's side. Keisha sobbed openly now, her hands covering her face. David looked at his family, his terrified children, his furious wife, and felt utterly powerless. This was supposed to be their dream vacation. They'd saved for years. They'd planned every detail. And now they were being treated like criminals because someone couldn't believe that a black family could afford to be here. Near the concierge desk, David could see them, the older white couple who'd started all of this. The husband had his arms crossed, looking satisfied. The wife looked slightly less certain now, but she didn't speak up. Didn't say, "Wait, maybe we were wrong," didn't apologize. Just stood there watching the show they'd created. "Fine," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you need from us?" Officer Bradley nodded, apparently pleased with David's compliance. "We need to verify your identity, check the reservation system thoroughly, and possibly inspect the suite to confirm you're actually staying there." "Inspect our suite?" Patricia's voice was incredulous. "You want to search our private room? It's standard procedure in trespassing investigations." "This isn't a trespassing investigation," Patricia shouted. "This is harassment." "Ma'am, last warning. Control yourself or you'll be the one in handcuffs." David put his hand on Patricia's arm, a silent plea for her to back down. He could see the calculations running through her mind. She was a lawyer, she knew her rights, she wanted to fight this. But she also knew what could happen if this escalated further. They'd both seen the videos. They'd both watched the news stories. Black people who argued with police. Black people who asserted their rights. Black people who ended up arrested, injured, or worse. Patricia took a shaky breath and stepped back. tears of rage and frustration streaming down her face. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again, and again. He'd been ignoring it for the past 15 minutes, but whoever was calling wasn't giving up. His mind raced. He knew exactly who it was, and he knew that answering that call would change everything. But he hesitated. Part of him wanted to see how far this would go. Wanted to experience fully what millions of Black Americans experienced every day when they didn't have his particular advantage, when they didn't have his connections, when they didn't have his status. The phone buzzed again. Officer Bradley was talking to Mr. Hendricks now, discussing the procedure for verifying guests. Officer Martinez was speaking into her radio, probably calling for backup or running David's license through the system. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the fountain in the corner, water trickling over decorative stones. Devin tugged on David's shirt. "Dad," he whispered, "are they going to take you away?" That question, the fear in his 9-year-old son's voice, made David's decision for him. He pulled out his phone. The missed calls were all from the same number, just as he'd expected. He looked at Officer Bradley, at the smug couple by the concierge desk, at Mr. Hendricks fumbling with his computer. "I need to take this call," David said. Officer Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "Make it quick," David answered, putting the phone on speaker. "Hello? David!" The voice that came through was deep and authoritative, tinged with concern and more than a little anger. "What the hell is going on down there? My security team just informed me there's some kind of incident in the lobby involving you and Patricia." "What's happening?" The lobby went very quiet. That voice, everyone recognized it. It was impossible not to. "Governor Harrison," David said calmly. "There's been a situation. Resort security called the police on my family. They're claiming we're trespassing." There was a brief, deadly silence on the other end of the line. Then, "They what?" Officer Bradley's face had gone pale. His hand dropped from his belt. Officer Martinez looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "I'm coming down there right now," Governor Harrison said. "Don't let anyone touch you or your family. Do you understand me, David? Don't let them do anything." "Yes, sir," David replied. He ended the call and looked up at the officers, at the manager, at the gathered crowd. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so dramatically it was almost visible. "Judge David Reynolds," Patricia said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent lobby. "Superior Court Judge David Reynolds. My husband presides over cases in this state. And Governor Harrison is here for the same judicial conference my husband is keynoting tomorrow." Officer Bradley looked like he might be sick. But David wasn't done. Not even close, because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every Black family who'd been through this same humiliation and didn't have a governor's phone number, and he was going to make sure that point wasn't lost on anyone. The silence in the lobby was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Officer Bradley's face had gone from confident to pale in a matter of seconds. His partner, Officer Martinez, stood frozen, her hand halfway to her radio like she'd forgotten what she was doing. David watched the realization dawn on their faces. "Judge." The words seemed to echo in the space between them, changing everything. He wasn't just some random guy they could push around. He was someone who had power in their world. Someone who could make their lives very difficult. But that realization only made David angrier. Mr. Hendricks, the resort manager, suddenly became very busy at his computer. "Judge Reynolds," he stammered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm so terribly sorry for this misunderstanding. I see your reservation right here. Presidential Suite 5 nights, checked in on Tuesday. Everything is in perfect order." "Funny how the system started working so quickly," Patricia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Before anyone could respond, the elevator doors opened and a man stepped out, flanked by 2 people in suits who were clearly security personnel. Governor William Harrison was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. He'd been governor for 6 years and was known for being tough but fair. His eyes swept the lobby and landed on David. Then he saw Keisha's tear-streaked face and Devin clinging to his father's side, and his expression darkened. "Someone better start explaining," the governor said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of anger. "Why my friend and one of the most respected judges in this state is standing in this lobby surrounded by police officers." Officer Bradley straightened up, trying to regain some authority. Governor Harrison, we were responding to a call about possible trespassing. We didn't know. Didn't know what? The governor cut him off. Didn't know he was a judge? So if he wasn't a judge, this would be acceptable? If he was just a regular black man on vacation with his family, it would be okay to humiliate him in front of his children? Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was no good answer to that question. Another person emerged from a group of onlookers near the fireplace. She was a black woman in her 40s, wearing a business suit and carrying herself with obvious authority. Attorney General Linda Foster walked over to David, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "David," she said warmly, then turned to look at the officers with an expression that could freeze water. "I'm going to need names and badge numbers from all of you. Right now." The officers exchanged nervous glances. Attorney General Foster pulled out her phone and started taking notes as they reluctantly provided their information. A fourth person approached, an older white man with kind eyes and a shock of white hair. Police Commissioner Robert Hayes had been with the department for 35 years and had a reputation for taking corruption and misconduct seriously. He'd been attending the same judicial conference and had come down when he heard there was a situation involving officers from his department. Commissioner Hayes took one look at the scene, and his jaw tightened. "Bradley, Martinez, Johnson, outside now. Commissioner, we were just outside." His voice left no room for argument. The three officers filed out like school children being sent to the principal's office. Their earlier swagger and authority had completely evaporated. David finally allowed himself to relax slightly, his grip on Devon's shoulder loosening. But when he looked down at his son, he saw something that broke his heart. Devon wasn't relieved. He was confused, trying to understand why the scary police officers suddenly became respectful when other important people showed up. Keisha had stopped crying, but her eyes held something new, a kind of awareness that childhood innocence had been stripped away. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before, that her family's safety could depend on who her father knew, not on whether they'd done anything wrong. Governor Harrison put his hand on David's shoulder. "Are you and your family okay? Did they hurt anyone?" "We're physically fine," David said quietly. "But my kids just learned a lesson they shouldn't have had to learn this way." The governor nodded, understanding immediately what David meant. He crouched down to Devon's level. "Hey, buddy. I know that was scary, but I want you to know that what happened here wasn't right, and we're going to make sure it gets fixed, okay?" Devon nodded but didn't speak. Attorney General Foster approached Patricia, who was still shaking with anger and adrenaline. "Patricia, as both a friend and as the state's Attorney General, I want you to know that you have every legal right to pursue action against these officers, the resort, and anyone else involved. This was textbook racial profiling." Patricia nodded, her lawyer brain already cataloging everything that had happened. "I documented everything, and there are at least 20 people who recorded the whole thing on their phones." David looked around the lobby. The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, more people had gathered, drawn by the commotion and the arrival of the governor. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable, probably realizing they'd just witnessed something deeply wrong. A few were still recording, and there, still standing by the concierge desk, were the couple who'd started it all. The husband's arms were no longer crossed. He looked uncertain now, like maybe he was starting to realize this wasn't going to end well for them. The wife had gone pale. David walked toward them. Governor Harrison moved to follow, but David held up his hand. "It's okay. I just want to talk to them." He stopped a few feet away from the couple. Up close, he could see they were wealthy. Designer clothes, expensive watches, the kind of deep tans that came from spending winters somewhere warm. They'd probably been coming to places like this their whole lives, had probably never been questioned about whether they belonged. "I want you to look at my children," David said, his voice calm but firm. "Really look at them." The couple reluctantly glanced at Devon and Keisha. "My son is 9 years old. My daughter is 13. They were playing in a pool, laughing, having fun on a family vacation we saved for years to afford. What about that scene made you think we were trespassing? What made you decide we didn't belong here?" The husband shifted uncomfortably. "We were just concerned about security. You can't be too careful these days." "Security," David repeated. "My children were a security threat? Or was it just that we were black people in a space where you thought we didn't belong? The wife finally spoke, her voice shaky. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We just thought. You thought what? Patricia joined David, her voice sharp. You thought the resort had somehow let in black people by mistake? You thought we'd stolen someone's room keys? What exactly was your thought process? The woman had no answer. Her husband looked at the floor. Attorney General Foster stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Hastings, yes, we know your names now. You should be aware that your actions today could have serious legal consequences. Judge Reynolds would be well within his rights to file a civil suit against you for harassment and discrimination. Mr. Hastings finally looked up. This is ridiculous. We have rights too. We were just trying to— To what? David's voice rose for the first time. To protect yourself from a 10-year-old boy playing in a pool? To keep your precious resort free from black families who work just as hard as you did to be here? Governor Harrison stepped in, sensing the situation was escalating. I think everyone needs to take a breath. Commissioner Hayes is dealing with the officers. Mr. Hendricks, I assume you'll be addressing your security staff's behavior. The resort manager nodded vigorously. Absolutely, Governor. This is completely unacceptable. Judge Reynolds, your entire stay will be fully refunded and we'd like to offer additional compensation. I don't want your money, David said, cutting him off. I want change. Real change. I want to make sure this never happens to another family. A new voice spoke up from the crowd. Then let's make that happen. David turned to see a woman in her 30s with a press badge around her neck. I'm Rachel Chen from the National News Network. I've been recording everything that happened here today. Judge Reynolds, if you're willing to go on record about this incident, I can guarantee it'll be on the national news tonight. David looked at Patricia, who nodded. Then he looked at his children. Devin was still scared, still confused. But Keisha had stopped crying. She stood straighter now, and when she met her father's eyes, he saw determination there. Dad, Keisha said softly, if we don't say something, this will just happen to someone else. Maybe someone who doesn't have a governor to call. Out of the mouths of babes, David's 13-year-old daughter had just articulated exactly what he'd been thinking. He turned back to the reporter. Yes, I'll go on record. But first, I need to have a conversation with Commissioner Hayes, Attorney General Foster, and Mr. Hendricks. Because what happened here today isn't just about me. It's about a system that assumes black people don't belong in certain spaces. And if I have any say in it, that system is about to change. Governor Harrison smiled. A grim smile, but a smile nonetheless. That's the David Reynolds I know. Always fighting for what's right. Not always, David admitted, looking at his family. But after today, after watching my children go through this, I'm done staying quiet. This ends now. The crowd in the lobby erupted in spontaneous applause. Not everyone joined in. Some people slipped away quietly, uncomfortable with the confrontation. But enough people clapped that it echoed off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. David knew the real work was just beginning. The refund, the apologies, even the news coverage, none of that would matter if nothing actually changed. But for the first time since those security guards had approached him at the pool, he felt like maybe, just maybe, something good could come from this nightmare. And tomorrow, he had a keynote speech to give at the judicial conference. He'd been planning to talk about courtroom procedures and legal precedents. But after today, he had something much more important to say. 2 hours later, David sat in a private conference room on the resort's top floor. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, but nobody was admiring the view. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of what needed to happen next. Around the large mahogany table sat Governor Harrison, Attorney General Foster, Police Commissioner Hayes, the resort's regional director Thomas Carlton, who'd flown in emergency from corporate headquarters, and the resort's head lawyer, a nervous woman named Jennifer Park. Patricia sat beside David, her legal pad already filled with notes. David had sent the kids up to their suite with one of the governor's security team members. Devin needed rest and Keisha needed time to process everything. They'd ordered room service, the resort's way of trying to make amends, though everyone knew fancy burgers weren't going to fix what had happened. Commissioner Hayes spoke first. Judge Reynolds, I've placed Officers Bradley, Martinez, and Johnson on immediate administrative leave. There will be a full investigation into their conduct, and I'm personally overseeing it. What happened today was inexcusable. Was it? David leaned forward. Or was it exactly what happens every day to people who look like me? They responded to a complaint about a black family and immediately assumed we were criminals. They didn't ask questions. They didn't verify facts. They came in ready to arrest us. I understand your anger, and do you? David's voice was sharp. Have you ever been questioned about whether you belong somewhere? Have your kids ever watched police officers threaten to arrest their father for the crime of existing in the wrong place? Commissioner Hayes had the decency to look uncomfortable. No, I haven't. Then you don't understand. Not really. David took a breath, trying to channel his anger into something productive. But I appreciate that you're taking action. What I need to know is what happens next. Because suspending 3 officers isn't enough. Attorney General Foster jumped in. We're prepared to offer full support for any legal action you want to pursue. Civil rights violation, harassment, whatever you need. And I'm opening an investigation into the police department's protocols for handling these kinds of calls. Thomas Carlton, the regional director, cleared his throat. He was in his 50s wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Judge Reynolds, on behalf of Azure Bay Resort and our entire corporate family, I want to offer our sincerest apologies. What happened to you and your family is completely contrary to our values and our policies. Patricia laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your policies? Your security guards racially profiled us. Your manager hesitated to confirm our reservation even though we'd been guests for 3 days. Your staff stood by and watched while my children were humiliated. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in your policies. Carlton's face flushed. You're absolutely right. Our policies clearly aren't being followed or they're inadequate. That's why I'm here, to make this right. You can't make this right, David said quietly. You can't give my kids back their sense of safety. You can't erase the memory of watching their father be treated like a criminal, but you can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. What do you want us to do? Carlton asked. David had been thinking about this since the moment the governor arrived. He'd been thinking about all the times this had happened to other people, people without his advantages. People who'd been arrested, injured, or worse because someone decided they looked suspicious. I want a complete overhaul of your security training, David began. Every employee, from the front desk to security to housekeeping, needs to go through mandatory implicit bias training. And I don't mean some token 2-hour session. I mean real, intensive training that forces people to confront their assumptions. Carlton nodded, taking notes on his tablet. I want your complaint verification process completely redesigned. Before anyone calls security, let alone police, on a guest, there needs to be actual verification of a problem, not just someone looks like they don't belong here. Agreed, Carlton said. And I want a fund established, $25,000 a year, minimum. The Devon and Keisha Reynolds Hospitality Inclusion Fund. It'll provide scholarships for young people of color who want careers in hospitality management, because part of the problem is that people like me aren't expected to be guests. Maybe if more of us were running these places, that would change. Patricia squeezed David's hand under the table. He knew she was proud of him for turning this nightmare into something positive. Consider it done, Carlton said. Is there anything else? David turned to look at the resort's lawyer. Ms. Park, I assume you've been documenting everything. Jennifer Park looked startled at being addressed directly. Yes, Judge Reynolds. We're prepared to draw up a settlement agreement that includes everything you've outlined, plus compensation for your family. I don't want compensation for us, David said. Put that money into the scholarship fund. Make it $50,000 a year instead of $25,000. Carlton's eyes widened, but he nodded. That's incredibly generous of you. It's not generous. It's necessary. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ocean. Here's what people don't understand. I'm lucky. I'm a judge. I have connections. I had the governor's phone number in my pocket. But what about the family that was here last month? Or the one that'll be here next month? The ones without my advantages? What happens to them? The room was silent. David turned back to face them. That's why this can't just be about me getting justice. It has to be about changing the system. Because somewhere right now, another black family is being questioned about whether they belong in a store, or a restaurant, or a neighborhood. And nobody's riding in to save them. Governor Harrison spoke up. David, what you're doing here, it's important. But you know this goes beyond one resort, beyond this police department. I know, David agreed. That's why I'm changing my keynote speech tomorrow. Every judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, and legal professional in that conference room needs to hear this story. They need to understand how their own biases play out in courtrooms every single day. You're going to make some people uncomfortable, Attorney General Foster warned. Good. Comfortable people don't change. Uncomfortable people do. Patricia stood up and joined David by the window. We should also talk about Mr. and Mrs. Hastings, the couple who started all this. Commissioner Hayes shifted in his seat. What about them? They need to face consequences too, Patricia said. They can't just walk away from this. David nodded. I want them to make a donation to the NACP Legal Defense Fund, $20,000. And I want them to write letters to Devin and Keisha, not to me, to my children, explaining why what they did was wrong and what they learned from it. You can't force them to do that, Jennifer Park said carefully. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a warm smile. We can if it's part of a settlement agreement to avoid a very public lawsuit. I'm a civil rights attorney, Ms. Park. I know exactly what case we could build against them for harassment and discrimination. The question is whether they want to do this the easy way or the hard way. I'll reach out to them, Carlton said. I think they'll agree to your terms. Make sure they understand this isn't optional, David added. My kids deserve to hear why they were targeted. They deserve real apologies, not corporate speak. The meeting continued for another hour, hammering out details and timelines. By the end, David had commitments in writing. The training program would start within 60 days. The scholarship fund would be established by the end of the month, and the police department would implement new protocols within 90 days. But as they were wrapping up, David had one more question. Commissioner Hayes, can I ask you something? Of course. Those three officers, Bradley, Martinez, and Johnson, when you investigate them, what are you really going to find? Will this be the first time they've done something like this, or just the first time they got caught? Hayes looked uncomfortable. I don't know yet, but I promise you I'll find out, and if there's a pattern, they won't be coming back to work. Good, David said, because I keep thinking about all the times they've done this when there wasn't a judge involved. All the people they've harassed who couldn't fight back. We'll look into their complete history, Hayes promised. You have my word. As everyone gathered their things to leave, Governor Harrison pulled David aside. You're doing the right thing, you know, using your platform to make change. But David, be prepared when you give that speech tomorrow. Not everyone is going to like what you have to say. Some people are going to push back hard. David thought about Devin's face when the police arrived. He thought about Keisha crying in the lobby. He thought about every black parent who'd had to have the talk with their kids about how to stay safe, from the very people who were supposed to protect them. Let them push back, David said. I've got something to say and I'm going to say it, whether they like it or not. Later that night, after tucking Devin and Keisha into bed, David sat on the balcony of their suite. Patricia joined him, bringing 2 cups of tea. You were amazing today, she said softly. I was angry, David corrected. I'm still angry. You can be both. Angry and amazing, she sipped her tea. The kids are going to be okay, you know. Keisha especially. I think she understands what you're trying to do. I hope so, David said. I hope they understand that this wasn't about me being important. It was about using whatever power I have to protect people who don't have any. Patricia leaned her head on his shoulder. That speech tomorrow, you're really going to tell them everything? Everything, David confirmed. And then we'll see what happens. What happened would change the course of David's career, spark a national conversation about racial profiling, and ultimately lead to policy changes in police departments and businesses across the country. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, David just sat with his wife looking out at the ocean and tried to find peace in the fact that maybe, just maybe, his family's nightmare would prevent someone else's. The grand ballroom of the Azure Bay Resort was packed. Over 500 people filled the seats: judges, prosecutors, defense, attorneys, legal scholars, and law enforcement officials from across the country. They'd all come for the National Judicial Conference, expecting 3 days of legal discussions and networking. David stood backstage, looking through a gap in the curtain at the sea of faces. His hands were shaking slightly. In 20 years of presiding over courtrooms, he'd never been this nervous. Patricia came up behind him and adjusted his tie. You've got this, she whispered. Just speak from the heart. What if they don't listen? What if they think I'm just another angry black man making everything about race? Then they prove your point. Patricia said simply. But David, look at who's out there. I see judges who've called you for advice, attorneys who respect your work. They'll listen. From the front row, David could see Devin and Keisha sitting with Governor Harrison's wife. Devin looked nervous, but proud, wearing the suit they'd bought him for the trip. Keisha sat straight-backed, her chin up, looking more grown-up than she had just days ago. The conference organizer, Dr. Helen Martinez, appeared beside them. Judge Reynolds, we're ready when you are. I have to say, when I heard what happened to you here, I was devastated. I'm glad you're still willing to speak. I almost canceled, David admitted. But then I realized this is exactly where this conversation needs to happen. Dr. Martinez squeezed his shoulder. Whatever you need to say it. This audience needs to hear it. She walked onto the stage to introduce him. David took a deep breath. This was it. Distinguished guests, Dr. Martinez began. We're honored to have Judge David Reynolds as our keynote speaker. Judge Reynolds has served on the Superior Court for 12 years and has been recognized nationally for his fair and thoughtful rulings. But today he's going to speak to us not just as a judge, but as a father, a husband, and a black man who experienced something at this very resort that none of us should tolerate. Please welcome Judge David Reynolds. The applause was warm, but cautious. People knew something had happened, but they didn't know the full story yet. David walked to the podium, his notes in hand. But as he stood there, looking out at all those faces, he realized he didn't need the notes. He needed to tell them the truth. I had a speech prepared, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. It was about judicial ethics and legal precedents. It was safe, professional, exactly what you'd expect at a conference like this. He paused, setting the notes aside. But 3 days ago, something happened that changed everything. My family and I were accused of trespassing at this resort. Security guards questioned us. Police were called. My 9-year-old son watched officers threaten to arrest his father. My 13-year-old daughter cried in a lobby full of strangers while people recorded the whole thing on their phones. The room was absolutely silent now. We weren't trespassing. We were paying guests in the presidential suite. But someone looked at us, a black family, and decided we couldn't possibly belong here. And every person in the chain from security to police believed that assumption more than they believed our proof of reservation. David could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Good. Uncomfortable meant they were listening. Now here's the thing that's been eating at me. I was saved by my title. The moment people learned I was a judge, everything changed. Suddenly I was Judge Reynolds, deserving of respect and apologies. Police officers who'd been ready to arrest me were falling over themselves to make amends. The resort manager who'd been questioning my reservation suddenly found it in the system. He gripped the podium. But what if I wasn't a judge? What if I was just David, an accountant on vacation with his family? Would the governor have come to my rescue? Would the police commissioner have launched an investigation? Would any of you be listening to me right now? A woman in the third row was nodding, tears in her eyes. David recognized her. Judge Lisa Thompson, one of the few other black judges in the state. I keep thinking about all the people who go through this same thing every single day without my advantages. The teenager stopped for matching a description. The family questioned at the mall. The professional asked for extra ID at the bank. All the people who get told to calm down, to comply, to not make it about race. David's voice grew stronger. And here's where it comes back to us, to everyone in this room. We sit in judgment of others every single day. We decide who's credible and who's not, who deserves bail and who's a flight risk, who made an honest mistake and who's a career criminal. And if we're honest with ourselves, how many of those decisions are influenced by what someone looks like? A few people looked angry now, but more were leaning forward, engaged. I'm not saying we're all racists, I'm saying we're all human, and humans have biases. But unlike most humans, our biases have the power to take away someone's freedom. Our gut feelings can put someone in prison. Our assumptions can separate children from parents. David pulled out his phone and held it up. After what happened to me went viral, I've received hundreds of messages, people sharing their stories. A black doctor questioned by hospital security in his own workplace. A Latino lawyer asked if he was the defendant's family member instead of the attorney. An Asian judge mistaken for a translator in her own courtroom. He put the phone down. If this can happen to us, people with law degrees and gavels and titles, what's happening to everyone else? Governor Harrison was nodding from his seat. Attorney General Foster had her hand over her heart. I could have kept quiet about what happened to me. I could have taken the resort's refund and their apologies and moved on. Lord knows, part of me wanted to. I wanted to protect my kids from more trauma. I wanted to go back to my life and pretend this was just a weird, isolated incident. David looked at Keisha and Devin. But my daughter said something that changed my mind. She said, "Dad, if we don't say something, this will just happen to someone else." She's 13 years old, and she understood what I was trying to avoid. That silence protects the system, not the people hurt by it. Now David was fighting back tears. So I'm not going to be silent. And I'm asking all of you not to be silent either. When you see racial profiling in your courtroom, call it out. When you notice disparities in sentencing, examine why. When someone tells you they experienced discrimination, believe them instead of dismissing it. He pulled out a document from his jacket. I'm proposing something I'm calling the Reynolds Protocol. It requires annual implicit bias training for all judges. It mandates collection of demographic data on bail and sentencing decisions. It creates an independent review board to examine patterns of racial disparity in courtrooms nationwide. The room erupted in whispers. This was bigger than one speech. This was a call for systemic change. Some of you are thinking this is too much, too radical, too political. But I'm asking you, if not now, when? If not us, who? We're the justice system. We're supposed to be the ones ensuring fairness and equality. We can't do that if we're not willing to look at our own practices honestly. David's voice softened. My son asked me last night if the police were going to come back. My daughter said she doesn't want to go to nice places anymore because she's afraid someone will call the cops on us again. That's what our children are learning. That the world isn't safe for them even when they've done nothing wrong. He paused, letting that sink in. I became a judge because I believed in justice. I still do. But justice isn't just about following the law. It's about examining whether the law is being applied fairly to everyone. It's about recognizing when the system is broken and having the courage to fix it. David looked around the room one more time. I'm submitting the Reynolds Protocol to the Judicial Ethics Committee next week. I'm asking every one of you to support it, not for me, but for every person who's ever been judged by their appearance instead of their actions. For every family that's been made to feel like they don't belong. For every child who deserves to grow up believing that justice really is blind. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being willing to do the hard work of change. For a moment, there was silence. Then Patricia stood up, applauding. Keisha and Devin jumped to their feet, clapping hard. Governor Harrison rose next, then Attorney General Foster. Judge Lisa Thompson was openly crying as she stood. And then, like a wave, the entire room stood. Not everyone. David could see a few people who remained seated, arms crossed, resistant to change. But most of the room was on their feet, applauding not just for him but for the conversation he'd started. David looked at his family and felt something shift inside him. The humiliation, the anger, the fear. It was all still there. But now there was something else too. Hope, purpose, a sense that maybe his family's pain could prevent someone else's. 3 months later, the Reynolds Protocol would be adopted in 15 states. A year after that, David would publish his memoir, which would become required reading in law schools. 5 years down the road, Keisha would start her freshman year at law school, determined to continue her father's work.